I recently asked artificial intelligence a question about taxation, and this is very important to pay attention to and to analyze the response given because taxation is actually the foundation of state government, right? Taxation is actually what distinguishes that organization from other organizations. Government is mainly understood to be a service provider, right? They provide the roads, right? They provide security, police and fire department services. They provide schools, right? Um, they're considered a service provider. But what distinguishes them from other service providers, like a private company or a charity or just individuals providing services, is that they tax people, right? That is a distinct characteristic of government. And I find it very odd that that isn't just pointed out more often in discussions on government, is that they are the people that tax other people. So, with that said, I'd also like to bring your attention to the fact that what services are provided that are typically listed as, the legitimate use of tax money, like roads and so on, like I mentioned, there are many other things that are done with tax dollars besides these things. Actually, the services that are referenced as like supposedly the main things that are done with our tax money actually aren't the main things that are done with our tax money. So to think that it's just limited to these few good things is just incorrect. It's not taking into account the billions and billions of dollars that go towards uh, many different operations and programs, many of which are not even publicly disclosed. So, with that said, I'm going to read the question I asked the artificial intelligence called Leo and read you the response I received and then analyze that response. The question I asked is, what is the difference between extortion and taxation? And the AI replied, quote, extortion typically involves obtaining money or property through force or threats, often illegally. Taxation, on the other hand, is a legally established process where citizens contribute a portion of their income to support government services. While some argue that taxation can feel coercive, it is fundamentally different from extortion due to its legal basis and purpose, end quote. So it's good to reference some definitions when analyzing an argument or analyzing an explanation that's given to us. And Leo actually does follow the definition of extortion properly in the initial response. When Leo said extortion typically involves obtaining money or property through force or threats. That is the definition of extortion. If you look it up in a dictionary, you will find it defined as such. And I have a couple definitions um, handy here to just confirm that. Looked at the Cambridge, I looked at Merriam-Webster, and there's agreement that extortion involves taking money from other people through force, threats, or intimidation. Another word used in the dictionary definition is intimidation, which is, synonymous with threatening someone. So far, so good with Leo's response, but this is where it takes a turn and needs some analysis when Leo says, taxation, on the other hand, is a legally established process where citizens contribute a portion of their income to support government services. So now Leo is saying that taxation is different because it's legally established. And what is taxation? Well, the definition of tax, to tax, the verb, is a charge, usually of money, imposed by authority on persons or property for public purposes or services. So it's a charge of money for public services, right? Again, the fundamental idea of government is that it's basically a service provider for the people, and taxation is the charge for that service, right? Just as if you were to call a plumber, the plumber would say, okay, it's going to cost this much money. You agree, you pay the money, the plumber does the service, right? We're told that it's just like that. You're getting these services, this is the charge. And this is supposedly under a social contract, right? Because obviously, with a private corporation, it's more contractual, right? You actually have a written agreement usually, or at least a verbal agreement, that you will pay a certain amount of money for a particular service, right? Even when you call a mechanic and ask for an estimate, you say, okay, if the cost will be approximately your estimate, I agree. Please order the part for my car or truck, and we'll schedule a time for you to install it for me. Right? So there's this voluntary contractual agreement of a request for a service, a price that's given for that service, and an agreement to pay. Right? That's normally how services are provided. But that is not actually the way in which taxation works, because you don't actually request the service to begin with, and you don't get to voluntarily choose whether you pay for it or not, right? The money is just taken from you automatically, right? Like income tax, it's automatically taken out of your paycheck, right? That's very different from a private company or individual that you make a arrangement with, whether that be an exchange of money or barter or trade. It's very different if the person were to take the money from you first and then say, oh, well, I'm going to do good things for you and others with it afterward, right? But Leo here is saying that this is actually legitimate because it has been legally established. So, how is this arrangement of taxation legally established? Well, it was written into the Constitution of the country. In the United States, it was written in Article 1, Section 8. Quote, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes. So, as simple as that. That is the legal foundation. Right? This was signed by 39 men in the year 1787. Most exactly 237 years ago. I'm recording this on September 15th, 2024. And this document was signed on September 17th, 1787, by only 39 men. So about 3 dozen men signed a document that said the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes. And that is the legal foundation. That is it. That is the legal establishment. Now, when I'm putting a critical eye on Article 1, Section 8 here, I'm not ignoring the context of that document. I'm not ignoring the Declaration of Independence. I'm not ignoring the Bill of Rights. I'm not ignoring all of the, what we could say are good qualities or good intentions and good actions that revolved around this event. But I'm also not ignoring that even that event wasn't as clear-cut as our history books make it out to be. There was actually a big battle between what are called the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were basically for more centralized power. The Anti-Federalists were for much more decentralized power. And basically the Federalists won by pushing through this Constitution with only 39 men signing it, and many abstaining from doing so or not even being invited to do so. But rather to get into more of the history of how the Constitution came to be, I'll return now to Leo's explanation of how taxation is not actually equivalent to extortion. Again, Leo is saying it's different. On the other hand, taxation, on the other hand, is a legally established process where citizens contribute a portion of their income to support government services. So because of this legality, it's not extortion. So that should make you ask the question, well then, does all a government have to do is make the action of extortion legal for it to not be extortion? If extortion is taking money from people under threat of violence, but then a group of people can do that same action, but just write on a piece of paper that it's legal, does it no longer remain the act of extortion? Right? Because fitting the definition, the money is certainly taken. There's no doubt about that side of it, right? As far as taxation go, they're definitely taking the money. You know, whether it's from your paycheck or just during transactions. So then the question is, well, is there any force or threat or intimidation? Well, if you don't pay your taxes, you do get communication from the government, right, from the IRS saying, you owe this money in taxes. And if you don't pay us, there will be fines and possibly imprisonment. So being told that if you don't pay us, we're going to increase hardship in your life, increase suffering in your life, that certainly falls under the definition of threat, right? We understand that this is basically how mafias operate. You know, they would go to a business and say, you know, pay us our monthly due every month and you'll be safe. We won't hurt you. We won't destroy your business. But if you don't pay, you know, you're going to get hurt. Right? That's the same activity. right? It's saying, we're taking this money, and if you don't agree, well, we're just going to respond with violence. This isn't actually a voluntary contractual agreement, right? It's being done through force or threats or intimidation. And that technically does still apply to taxation because there is that threat of force if you don't comply. There's no option to say no thanks, right? If someone in your community is offering a service like to mow your lawn and you say no thanks, but then they tell you, well, actually, you don't have a choice about it. You know, you're going to have to pay me X amount of dollars for mowing your lawn, whether you like to or not. Right? That wouldn't be considered okay. That would be considered aggressive. It'd be considered an act of extortion, right? Even if they did mow your lawn, right? If you wake up one morning and see your if you return from a trip and you see your lawn has been mowed, and then shortly thereafter your neighbor comes by and says, "Oh yeah, I mowed your lawn for you. That'll be $500." And you say, "Hey, wait a minute, I never asked you to mow my lawn." And then the neighbor says, "Oh, you better pay me. If you don't pay me, I'm gonna increase the cost. It's gonna be $1,000 that you owe me. And if you don't pay the $1,000, well, then I'm gonna kidnap you and throw you in a cage." Right? That wouldn't be considered okay because it's not, right? It's extortion. It's abusive behavior. So continuing with Leo's response, quote, "While some argue that taxation can feel coercive, it is fundamentally different from extortion due to its legal basis and purpose," end quote. So here, Leo is just reiterating this main assertion that it's not extortion because it's legal, because of its legal basis. But again, that legal basis was simply 3 dozen men signing a piece of paper that says we can tax people. But you or I can't do that. You or I can't find 38 other people to sign a document that says, everybody in this town has to start paying us money every year for services that we get to basically decide on what those services are, and whether we do a good job with those services or not doesn't matter. You still have to pay. And whatever we do with the extra money, some of it's basically none of your business. We might have some secret programs we want to do, and just that's just the way it is. If you don't like it, well, we're going to be committing aggression against you in a more severe manner, right? That would be considered criminal for 39 people to do today, but yet somehow it was considered okay for them to do it. And again, I'm not ignoring the context, and I'm not saying that them declaring independence from the rule of Great Britain was a bad thing, not at all. I think declaring independence from an abusive institution is 100% legitimate. But the fatal flaw in this independence was reinstituting a system of abuse on an entire population, right? They're saying this entire continent, wherever we have written, wherever the lines on the map exist now and in the future, if these lines expand in the future, as of course they did, this new territory with all the people born within that territory, they're subject to this taxation too, simply because we have written on this piece of paper that that's the way it's going to be. Right? So you can't just assert something is morally correct because you give it a different name and have 3 dozen people sign underneath it. But that is Leo's main uh, assertion here, the main argument uh, against the equivalency of extortion and taxation is simply that it has a legal basis. But again, I hope I've made it clear that that legal basis itself is not legitimate. And it's the same activity, but just under a different name. So I hope you found this of interest, and I hope you'll share this analysis with others, because the tax dollars certainly are being used for a lot of bad things, or at the least a lot of things that people don't agree with, right? When you see government programs and policies and agendas taking place that you don't agree with, well, obviously your own tax dollars are being used for so-called services that you never contractually agreed to and that you disagree with on an ethical basis, right? Again, if someone were to perform a service that you would find agreeable under voluntary arrangement, like someone mowing your lawn or fixing your car or so on, but you don't agree with it when it's done without your choice, there's a huge difference. And then even worse is when what they're doing is something you would never want in the first place. Like someone paints your house pink and then wants to charge you money for it, right? Well, you never wanted your house painted pink in the first place, right? You never wanted medical tyranny in the first place. You never wanted, you know, all of these abusive gun control policies. You never wanted these education programs teaching children things you disagree with, and on and on and on. Or you don't agree with what's being done by the military, harming civilians in other places. On and on, you can have all these disagreements, but it's supposedly okay because it has this legal basis. And it's supposedly somehow still equivalent to a contractual agreement, even though you never agreed, right? This idea of implicit consent that, well, if you just use a road at any time, or have you ever used any government service, then you're agreeing implicitly to the social contract doesn't hold any water, because it'd be like the person who mowed your lawn without asking for your permission first, without setting up a contract first. If you were then to like go sit out in your lawn, it'd be like that person saying, well, you can't, you're using the lawn that I fixed up for you, so who are you to complain about me charging you for fixing it up? It's the same as, well, you're using the road, or you're using this service, or you utilize this government program. In any case, if you actively seek out benefits from the government while you're being extorted by them, it could be to just counterbalance the theft of what was taken from you in the first place, right? If you're trying to find programs, so-called free programs and so on, from an institution that's been stealing from you your whole adult life, that doesn't mean that you agree with the stealing in the first place. It just means, well, if I don't pay the taxes, they're going to increase their violence against me. So at least I can make use of some of the services to, basically get back some of the money that was stolen from me to some degree. Doesn't that doesn't equate to consent. Use of services provided by extortion does not equal consent to those services. To suggest it is equivalent is just false. It's just bad reasoning. It doesn't hold up to scrutiny at all. And yet people utilize that argument over and over. Usually when I see someone, making a point against taxation, 9 times out of 10, and it seems the response is, well, you use the roads, don't you? You like having a fire department, don't you? Right? So it doesn't legitimize the extortion, and it also ignores the fact that these services can be provided through private companies and individuals. We don't need an extortion-based service provider, right? Fire departments and so on can actually be run largely by volunteers, but whether it's, or if we're talking about local police, a sheriff's department, these can actually be privatized. We're going to privatize security services. And saying, well, not everyone can afford it, doesn't legitimize extortion. Saying, well, I had to steal from you in order to provide a service to someone else. And on top of that, you're actually stealing from everyone, right? It's ignoring also the fact that the extortion itself is harmful and actually doesn't decrease poverty, but oftentimes just maintains it. Makes life harder for people having to pay these taxes. But fundamentally, again, the point is it's an abusive act, and even if someone were to take the money and do good services with it, that doesn't legitimize the act. So, again, I hope you found this insightful, and thank you for listening.